Welcome to Dreamy Old Stories. Here we tell slow and gentle tales from history. Stories that calm your mind and help you fall asleep. If you enjoy the journey, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin tonight's dreamy story. We leave the ruins behind and wander into the palaces that built them. The marble halls, the silk curtains, the corridors where power smelled faintly of perfume and paranoia. Because for every empire buried in the dirt, there was usually a ruler. At the top, lonely, over-decorated, and quietly falling apart. So let's drift through a few of them, one crown at a time. Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg experiment. We might as well start with the poster child for royal inbreeding. Charles II was born in 1661, the product of 2 centuries of keeping it in the family. He inherited the jawline of a family tree that never branched. Chronic illnesses, seizures, infertility, and, by some miracle, an entire empire to run. Courtiers whispered that he was bewitched. Physicians tried everything: potions, pilgrimages, exorcisms, and of course, more doctors. Charles died at 38, childless, confused, and probably relieved. His death triggered the War of the Spanish Succession, proving that sometimes genetics isn't the only bad inheritance. Empress Anna of Russia, Queen of Ice, and overcompensation, ruled Russia from 1730 to 1740 and loved 2 things: absolute control and very bad interior design. She once built a palace made entirely of ice, furniture, dishes, even the bed. Then she forced a nobleman she disliked to marry one of her maids inside it. The couple froze their way through the wedding night, while courtiers toasted their empress's sense of humor. Anna's reign wasn't all cruelty. She modernized administration and strengthened the army. But history mostly remembers the ice. Because when your decorating choices involve hypothermia, the paperwork tends to get overshadowed. Henry VIII. 6 marriages and a midlife crisis. England's most theatrical monarch never met a relationship he couldn't behead. Henry started as a handsome Renaissance prince and ended as a swollen, ulcer-ridden man convinced God was ghosting him. He married 6 times, executed 2 wives, annulled 2 more, and started his own church just to get out of 1 wedding contract. He left behind a daughter who became one of England's greatest rulers, Elizabeth I, and a kingdom permanently allergic to Catholic authority. In the end, his real legacy wasn't romance or religion, it was paperwork. England still lives with the administrative hangover of his emotional decisions. Marie Antoinette, the queen who never said the cake thing, born in Vienna, shipped to Versailles at 14. Married to a boy who didn't know how to hold a conversation or a country dot. Marie Antoinette became the symbol of royal excess, powdered hair, diamonds, and that legendary line, "Let them eat cake." Except she never said it. Someone made it up decades later, and the rumor stuck because it sounded like something she would say. She loved fashion, theater, and pretending to be a shepherdess in an expensive fake village, because that's what passed for stress relief at court. When the revolution came, she faced it with more dignity than anyone expected. Still, the guillotine doesn't care for dignity. Her last words were an apology for stepping on her executioner's foot. Even in death, she had better manners than most monarchs in life. Ludwig II of Bavaria, the fairy tale king who forgot reality. Ludwig II built castles like other people by throw pillows. Neuschwanstein, Linderhof, Herrenchiemsee, extravagant, isolated, and usually unfinished. He adored Wagner's operas and paid for them with taxpayer money, turning Bavaria's budget into a symphony of debt. He avoided court life, held candlelit dinners for imaginary guests, and spent nights rowing alone on mountain lakes. Eventually, the government declared him insane and removed him from power. Days later, he was found dead in a lake beside his psychiatrist. No one ever proved what happened, which feels exactly right for a man who built dreams and called them architecture. Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor and paranoid over a Chiveryu, already met his terracotta army earlier. But let's look at the man himself. He unified China in 221 BC, standardized currency, writing, and even axle widths. Then he went full control mode, burning books, burying scholars, and chasing immortality. He drank mercury-based potions designed to make him live forever. They worked about as well as you'd expect. He died young, but his mausoleum remains sealed. A city of traps, treasures, and probably enough poison gas to justify keeping it that way. Nero, Rome's most dramatic pyromaniac. Nero, the emperor who supposedly fiddled while Rome burned. Except fiddles didn't exist yet, and historians think he actually organized relief efforts. But why let facts ruin a perfectly good villain story? He fancied himself an artist, a poet, and a performer. He made senators sit through his recitals, and leaving early was not encouraged. Eventually, everyone got tired of the concert, and Nero fled the city disguised as a slave. His last words were, "What an artist dies in me." Rome probably whispered, finally. Queen Christina of Sweden, the Renaissance rebel Christina, became queen at 6, wore men's clothes, collected philosophers like trading cards, and once refused to marry on the grounds that it sounded boring. She abdicated the throne at 28, converted to Catholicism, and moved to Rome, where she spent the rest of her life throwing dinner parties for geniuses and scandalizing everyone else. She's buried in St. Peter's Basilica, the only woman interred among popes. Not bad for someone who decided crowns were overrated. George III, the mad king who wasn't so mad Britons. George III lost America and his sanity, or at least that's the reputation. Modern medicine says he likely suffered from porphyria, a rare metabolic disorder that causes confusion and pain. He was actually a devoted husband, a curious farmer, and an earnest believer in progress. But history likes simple stories, so he gets remembered as the crazy guy who talked to trees while his colonies declared independence. Still, there's something oddly moving about him, a king trapped in his own mind while the world changed outside his window. Cleopatra, 7. Last queen of the Nile, beautiful, brilliant, multilingual, and perpetually misunderstood. Cleopatra ruled Egypt at 21, outmaneuvered Rome's best generals, and turned politics into art. She spoke 9 languages, commanded fleets, and made alliances the old-fashioned way, through charm and diplomacy that later historians reduced to gossip. When defeat came, she refused to be paraded as a trophy. Legend says she let an asp bite her. More likely she took poison. Either way, she chose her ending, and that's more agency than most monarchs ever get. The long fade of royalty looked closely at all of them. Charles, Marie, Nero, Christina, Cleopatra. Different crowns, same story. They inherited the illusion of power, mistook it for permanence, and discovered that even thrones have expiration dates. Their empires crumbled. Their palaces turned into museums. Their portraits hang behind velvet ropes. But their humanity, messy, insecure, desperate to be remembered, that survived. Because history forgets titles, but it never forgets personality. Ivan the Terrible, Russia's first drama, King Ivan, started young, orphaned, and surrounded by scheming nobles who treated him like a prop. So when he finally took control, he made sure everyone knew who was in charge. He crowned himself Tsar of all the Russias, built cathedrals, reformed government, then spent the rest of his reign inventing creative ways to terrify people. He formed a secret police, executed boyars, and once killed his own son in a fit of rage. After that, even his surviving heirs were afraid to knock on his door too loudly. By the end, Ivan was paranoid, sick, and deeply religious, a man who alternated between prayer and purges. He died playing chess, which somehow feels on brand for a ruler who treated his entire country like a board game. Mary I of England, a heart to faithful long before her half-sister, Elizabeth ruled with wit and charisma. Mary Tudor ruled with sincerity and heartbreak. She was England's first reigning queen, and she inherited chaos. Her father, Henry VIII, had broken from Rome to get rid of her mother. Mary tried to undo it all, bringing back Catholicism with the earnestness of someone trying to glue a shattered plate back together. It didn't work. Hundreds were burned for heresy, and she became Bloody Mary, a nickname invented by Protestant propaganda that stuck for centuries. Behind the legend was a lonely woman who just wanted her world to make sense again. History rarely has patience for that kind of hope. Rasputin and the Romanovs' faith, fear, and bad decisions technically. Rasputin wasn't royalty, but he's impossible to skip. A mystic from Siberia with suspicious hygiene and hypnotic eyes. He drifted into the Russian court at exactly the wrong time. Serena Alexandra believed he could heal her hemophiliac son. The court hated him, rumors multiplied, and eventually a group of nobles decided poison and bullets were the best solution. Russia collapsed a year later. Turns out, when a dynasty depends on a self-proclaimed holy man who bathes less than his critics, the end is usually near. The Romanovs fell soon after, not because of one man, but because faith and politics rarely mix well when the candles start burning down. Emperor Tiberius, the recluse of Capri after Augustus, came Tiberius, a capable general who absolutely hated ruling. He left Rome to live on the island of Capri, surrounded by statues, rumors, and an ever-shrinking circle of trust. Senators wrote that he turned into a monster, throwing people off cliffs, indulging in dark pleasures, though most of that was probably gossip written by men who missed their expense accounts. What's true is simpler. Tiberius was tired. He'd seen too much power, lost too many friends, and wanted the noise to stop. When he died, Rome sighed with relief, the world's oldest recorded case of quiet quitting. Elizabeth I, the queen who married her job, she called herself married to England, and honestly, it was a complicated relationship. Elizabeth inherited a kingdom bankrupt, divided, and surrounded by enemies. She ruled with charm, caution, and more layers of makeup than modern chemistry can explain. She flirted with diplomacy like it was an art form, outmaneuvered assassins, and outlived everyone who ever tried to control her. Underneath the legend was a woman who refused to be ordinary, which, in the 1500s, was a political act in itself. When she died childless, she left no dynasty, only stability. And that, somehow, was the most romantic ending possible for a queen who never had time for love. Emperor Maximilian of Mexico, the imported dream Europe's idea of helping. Latin America in the 19th century went about as well as you'd expect. In 1864, France decided Mexico needed an emperor. So they shipped over Archduke Maximilian of Austria, a kind bookish man who believed in liberal reforms and good manners. He lasted 3 years. When the French army withdrew, Republican forces captured him. He faced the firing squad calmly, reportedly giving each soldier a gold coin and saying, "Aim well." He became a tragic symbol of misplaced idealism. A polite European who thought he could fix another continent's politics with etiquette, Queen Isabella II of Spain. The accidental scandal, machine-crowned at 3, married at 16 to her cousin, surrounded by generals, lovers, and priests. Isabella ruled in a blur of palace gossip. She changed ministers more often than wardrobes, survived coups, and eventually fled the country during yet another uprising. Spain loved her drama, but not her policies. When she abdicated, she lived quietly in Paris, which is history's polite way of saying she kept throwing parties until the money ran out. King Louis II of Hungary, the boy who drowned with his crown Louis II, took the throne at 10 and faced the Ottoman Empire at 20. At the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, his army collapsed and the young king fled on horseback. His armor was heavy. The swamp was deeper than it looked. They found him the next morning, face down, still wearing the crown. It was the end of medieval Hungary and the start of centuries of division. One moment of panic, one slip in the mud, and an entire kingdom vanished with the bubbles. Catherine the Great, the woman who rewrote her story, born a minor German princess. Catherine II arrived in Russia, learned the language, read Voltaire, and realized she could run the place better than her husband. She staged a coup, seized the throne, and ruled for 34 years. She modernized Russia, expanded education, and occasionally expanded her empire's borders while her enemies were still arguing. Rumors followed her. Wild, salacious, completely fabricated. They always do, when a woman governs better than her male predecessors, when she died. Russia called her the Great Witch, which might be the only time history and gossip ever agreed. Ferdinand I of Austria, the emperor who preferred pigeons born with severe epilepsy and developmental issues. Ferdinand was declared emperor mostly because no one else wanted to upset protocol. He reigned during the revolutions of 1848, but mostly left decisions to his advisors. When riots broke out in Vienna, he reportedly shouted from the palace window, "Are they allowed to do that?" Eventually, his uncle took over, and Ferdinand retired happily to a castle where he tended gardens, fed pigeons, and enjoyed pastries. By all accounts, he was content, which makes him one of the more successful Habsburgs by emotional standards. The last emperor of China, a boy in an empty Palasapui, the final ruler of the Qing dynasty, ascended the throne at 2 years old. He ruled from behind the walls of the Forbidden City, surrounded by servants who bowed lower than his understanding of what was happening. By the time he was a teenager, the empire was gone. He stayed in the palace as a symbolic ghost until the new government evicted him. He later became a puppet ruler for Japan, then a gardener under the communists. From dragon throne to dirt under his nails, that's the full circle of power. He lived long enough to see tourists pay to walk through his childhood home. Napoleon, the emperor who couldn't stop explaining himself, frambitious, brilliant, exhausting. He rose from minor Corsican officer to emperor of France in a decade, rewrote Europe's borders, and then rewrote his own legend in exile. Napoleon dictated his memoirs on St. Helena, as if history were just another battlefield. He lost the wars, but he won the narrative, which honestly is the more permanent victory. Somewhere, He's still explaining Waterloo to the wind, the soft collapse of thrones. Every monarch ends up the same way, a portrait in a hallway, a statue with a chipped nose, a line in a textbook that students half remember before exams. But there's tenderness in that anonymity. The crown falls, but the story stays, softened, slowed, almost human again. You realize that kings and queens weren't so different from anyone else. They just had better furniture and worse feedback loops. The last light of monarchs, if you stand long enough in any old palace, you start to notice the quiet. Not the kind that comes from emptiness, but the kind that hums. Footsteps that used to echo there. Chandeliers that once flickered over arguments disguised as dinner parties. Laughter that turned into orders. And then silence. Every crown we've drifted past tonight, from Charles's trembling rule to Cleopatra's stubborn dignity, shared one truth: power is never permanent. It just changes furniture. The jewels end up in museums. The thrones become photo ops. And the stories, once soaked in ceremony, get retold in half whispers by people like us. Long after midnight. Maybe that's the most royal thing left. The fact that we still remember them at all. Power, loneliness, and everything between. Every ruler starts with an idea. This time it'll be different. They raise banners, pass laws, build monuments. And then the same story unfolds. Love, fear, betrayal, taxes, the occasional war. The details change. The loneliness doesn't. Because being at the top means there's no one left to talk to without permission. Even the laughter sounds rehearsed. The palace becomes a stage, the throne a prop, and the crown a reminder that freedom is for other people. You start to understand why so many of them went strange. Too much silence, too much gold, not enough honesty. The dust beneath the throne eventually. Every empire turns into archaeology. Even the most powerful king ends up as a name carved on a plaque under dim museum lighting. The marble floors crack. The portraits darken. And the descendants, if they survive at all, live in quiet houses with too many old family photos. But maybe that's fair. Power isn't meant to last forever. It's meant to remind us what happens when we believe it can. And yet, somewhere in that dust, there's tenderness. A crown doesn't glitter without someone to polish it. A kingdom doesn't rise without people who dream it into being. Even the worst tyrant once believed he was saving someone. It doesn't excuse them, it just makes them human. The final audience, the hall, is empty now. The throne gleams faintly in the half-light. You can almost hear the shuffle of robes, the murmur of courtiers, the sigh of a crown set down at last. Outside, the night wind moves through old arches, carrying bits of laughter, argument, and regret. Inside, everything waits, still, patient, and perfectly balanced between memory and forgetting. That's where all kings and queens end up. Not gone, just paused, still rehearsing their lines in history's long sleep. If the past few hours were about kings and crowns, tonight is about the people who worked in the shadows beneath them. The ones who traded comfort for questions. Science didn't begin with white coats and funding. It began with dreamers stirring strange liquids, counting stars, and making mistakes so spectacular that sometimes the world changed anyway. So breathe slowly. Let the candle burn low. We're about to wander through history's quietest laboratories, the ones that smelled like hope, failure, and maybe a bit of sulfur. Tycho Brahe, the astronomer with the metal nose. If there were ever proof that genius and chaos share a small apartment, it's Tycho Brahe, a 16th century Danish nobleman. He mapped the stars with unmatched precision and lost part of his nose in a duel over a math problem. He replaced it with a metal prosthetic, drank excessively, and kept a tame elk that allegedly died after falling down a staircase while drunk. His observatory, Uraniborg, was part lab, part palace, and entirely Tycho. But behind the eccentricity, he built the data that let Johannes Kepler figure out how planets actually move. Without Tycho's meticulous sky charts, Kepler might still be guessing circles. Tycho died after refusing to leave a banquet to use the bathroom. His bladder gave out before his curiosity did. A strangely fitting end for someone who lived by the phrase, "Just one more observation, Johannes Kepler," the reluctant mystic of math Kepler, inherited Tycho's notes and turned them into cosmic truth. He spent decades proving that planets travel in ellipses, not perfect circles, an idea that horrified everyone who loved symmetry more than facts. He also tried to explain the universe through geometry, angels, and harmonies. Half scientist, half dreamer, all exhaustion. His mother was accused of witchcraft, partly because Kepler's letters about celestial influences sounded suspiciously like spells. He defended her in court himself, and won. Kepler's math outlived the superstition. His vision of the heavens still turns silently above us. Perfect ellipses drawn by a man who never quite fit the shape of his own world, Isaac Newton. The genius who forgot to eat Newton is usually remembered as the man with the apple. But honestly, the apple was the most normal thing that happened to him. He invented calculus out of spite, built the laws of motion, and spent an equally long time trying to decode the Bible and turn lead into gold. For every equation in his notebooks, there's a recipe for an elixir that might have exploded. He tested them anyway. He rarely slept, forgot to eat, and once jammed a needle into his eye just to see what would happen. He lived alone most of his life and wrote more about prophecy than physics. When asked how he did it all, he said he felt like a boy on the seashore finding a smoother pebble while the great ocean of truth lay undiscovered before me. He never mentioned the part where the ocean nearly drowned him. Galileo Galilei, the man who looked up to early Galileo, pointed a telescope at the sky and saw moons circling Jupiter. That was the problem. The church preferred everything to circle Earth. He called his telescope a spyglass, which was accurate. He was spying on the universe, and the universe refused to follow the script. When he said the Earth moves, they called it heresy. When he muttered, and yet it moves, they called it arrogance. He spent his last years under house arrest, writing in secret, half blind but still stubbornly certain that the truth didn't need permission. He died with the stars exactly where he said they were. Robert Hooke, the forgotten rival for every Newton. There's a Hooke, brilliant, prickly, and perpetually annoyed. Hooke discovered elasticity, improved the microscope, and basically invented cell biology. He was also the first to suggest that gravity might decrease with distance, something Newton later perfected. The two despised each other. When Hooke died, Newton allegedly made sure no portrait of him survived. Petty, yes, but effective. Hooke's discoveries still fill textbooks. His name, not so much. History has a habit of forgetting the quieter genius in the room. Antony van Leeuwenhoek, the man who saw too much a Dutch cloth merchant with no formal education. Leeuwenhoek built his own microscopes and became the first person to see bacteria. He called them animalcules, little animals, and sent letters to the Royal Society describing a hidden world inside a drop of water. Most scientists didn't believe him. Then they tried his lenses and saw the same thing. It was like discovering another universe on your fingertip. He spent 50 years peering into glass spheres the size of a pea, happily cataloguing what everyone else thought was invisible. When he died, he wrote a final letter describing a new microorganism found in his own body. Even on his deathbed, he was still taking notes. Mary Anning, the girl who found dragons in Stoneborn in 1799 on the English coast. Mary Anning grew up selling seashells to tourists and accidentally founded paleontology. She discovered the first complete ichthyosaur, the first plesiosaur, and proof that the Earth was older and stranger than anyone had imagined. But because she was poor, female, and working class, the men who bought her fossils took the credit. When asked if she believed in God, she said, "The world is so beautiful. I can't help believing in something that made it so." She never got recognition in her lifetime, but every museum owes her a thank you whispered into stone. Nikola Tesla, the dreamer who lit the air. Tesla treated electricity like poetry. He imagined a world without wires, where power hummed through the air like invisible rain. He built coils, towers, and impossible machines, most of which worked just long enough to scare investors. He lived in hotels, fed pigeons, and refused to shake hands for fear of germs. Edison stole the spotlight. Westinghouse stole the profits. Tesla died alone in a New York hotel room, his pockets empty, his notebooks full. Today, his name sells cars, satellites, and conspiracy theories. A fitting tribute to a man who lived entirely on voltage and imagination, Ada Lovelace, the mathematician who saw the future in the 1840s when machines still ran on steam. Ada Lovelace imagined one that could process symbols and maybe, someday, create art. She worked with Charles Babbage on his analytical engine, a room-sized computer that never got built, and wrote notes that read like prophecy. She called her algorithm poetical science. The world forgot her for a century. Now, every programmer carries a trace of her name in their code, whether they know it or not. She saw that numbers could describe more than quantities. They could describe thought. That realization alone changed everything. Gregor Mendel, the monk with peas and patience in a quiet monastery garden. Mendel grew generations of pea plants. He noticed patterns in how traits passed on: dominant, recessive, predictable. He presented his findings to a small audience. No one cared. He died unrecognized, and 30 years later, his notes were rediscovered. The foundation of genetics, hiding in plain sight. Turns out the future of biology was once a monk counting peas in silence. That alchemists, the beautiful failures before chemistry had equations, it had metaphors. Alchemy wasn't about turning lead into gold, not really. It was about turning ignorance into understanding. Men in robes mixed mercury and prayers, convinced that matter had moods. They failed at gold but succeeded at discovery. Acids, alloys, alcohol. Glass stopped their furnaces burned through centuries, and out of the smoke came the first sparks of modern science. Sometimes the path to truth starts with a beautiful lie. The border between genius and madness, there's a thin line between discovery and delusion. And most of history's innovators danced right on it. They believed in ideas that made everyone else uncomfortable. Sometimes they were right. Sometimes they were just early. That's what makes them unforgettable. They weren't chasing money or fame, just the thrill of asking what if. And even when they failed, they left fingerprints on the future. Leonardo da Vinci, the restless perfectionist, He's the one genius everyone knows. But even Leonardo probably didn't believe half the things people say about him. He painted, engineered, dissected, sculpted, calculated, and procrastinated like it was an Olympic sport. The Mona Lisa took him nearly 2 decades and still wasn't finished when he died. In his notebooks, he drew helicopters, bridges, submarines, and bizarre weapons no one could build for another 400 years. His handwriting was reversed, mirrored, as if even his notes were shy about being read. People called him a genius, but what he really was curious. He studied clouds, water, anatomy, light, sound, everything. That's why so much of his work feels alive. It's made by someone who couldn't stop wondering how anything worked. Leonardo once wrote, "Art is never finished, only abandoned." That could describe his entire life, one long, beautiful experiment with no final draft. Paracelsus, the doctor who burned the textbooks, born in 1493. Paracelsus was a physician who decided the best way to teach medicine was to insult every other doctor alive. He threw traditional medical texts into a bonfire and told his students that real healing came from nature, not superstition. He was the first to use chemicals in treatment, the first to notice that dosage mattered, and probably the first to make everyone in the faculty lounge furious. He carried vials of mercury, sulfur, and salt in his pockets, called himself the Luther of medicine, and roamed Europe like a medieval chemistry teacher on a bender. He was part scientist, part prophet, part menace, but he pushed medicine away from prayers and toward experiments. It's easy to laugh at him now, but half of modern pharmacology began in the ashes of his bonfire. Émile du Châtelet, the mathematician who outran Tim in the 18th century. France produced philosophers like bakeries produced bread, but only one of them was a woman who could outthink. Voltaire, Émile du Châtelet, translated Newton's Principia Mathematica into French, and not just translated it, but explained it. She corrected mistakes, added commentary, and expanded on the math so elegantly that physicists still cite her notes. While Voltaire wrote essays about reason, Émile quietly did it. She hosted salons, solved equations for fun, and dared to say that energy depends on the square of velocity, something Newton himself missed. She died in childbirth at 42, exhausted but still writing. Her work lived on, bridging the gap between Newton's world and Einstein's. And yet, for centuries, she was remembered mainly as Voltaire's lover. Typical Humphrey Davy, the chemist who lit the dark early 19th century chemistry, was half science, half fireworks display. Humphrey Davy loved both parts equally. He discovered sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, sometimes by accident, always with sparks. He also invented the Davy safety lamp, which saved countless miners from gas explosions. He once inhaled nitrous oxide, laughing gas, during an experiment and declared it a delightful experience. He then handed it around the lab like candy. Davy was so popular that Londoners bought tickets to watch him demonstrate chemistry, a sentence that has never been written about anyone else since. He died young. Overworked, his lungs ruined by the same gases he'd discovered, but his experiments burned bright enough to light the century that followed. Michael Faraday, the bookbinder who caught lightning. Faraday started as an apprentice bookbinder, reading scientific volumes while gluing their covers. He had no formal education, just a relentless curiosity and a polite persistence that would have driven most professors insane. He became Davy's assistant, then surpassed him. Faraday discovered electromagnetic induction, the basis for every electric motor. He refused fame, refused money, and refused to patent anything. When Queen Victoria offered him a knighthood, he declined, saying, "I prefer to remain plain, Mr. Faraday." He turned electricity from a magic trick into an everyday miracle. And when people asked how he did it, he simply said, "Work, finish, publish." It's the most humble summary of genius ever written. Charles Babbage, the man who invented the computer, before computers Babbage, was an engineer with the temperament of a malfunctioning typewriter. He dreamed up the difference engine and analytical engine, machines that could perform calculations automatically, powered by gears instead of electricity. He spent decades designing, redesigning, and complaining about the government not funding him enough. It never got built in his lifetime, but his blueprints were so precise that when modern engineers reconstructed them, the machine worked perfectly. He once suggested using cow entrails as raw material for paper and wrote long essays about how street musicians were ruining London. In other words, part visionary, part internet comment section. Still, his dream of mechanical calculation became reality a century later. Every computer hums in his shadow. Dmitri Mendeleev, the man who dreamed a table in 1869. Mendeleev looked at a chaotic pile of chemical facts and decided there must be order hidden inside it. He spent sleepless nights arranging elements on cards until they made sense, and when they didn't, he left blanks for ones not yet discovered. He said he saw the periodic table in a dream. When new elements were found, they fit perfectly into his empty spaces. Science rarely gives out that kind of poetic confirmation. Mendeleev later worked on vodka quality standards and balloon travel, because apparently he believed no human activity was beyond categorization. He died not knowing his table would become the skeleton of the universe. Maybe that's the nicest fate for a scientist, to be right longer than you live. Marie Curie, the glow that never faded born, Maria Sklodowska in Poland. She studied in secret before moving to Paris and meeting Pierre Curie together. They discovered polonium and radium, two elements that glowed faintly and destroyed everything they touched. Including them, Marie worked with bare hands, no protection, storing samples in her desk drawer because she liked the soft blue light they emitted. She became the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, and then the first person to win two. Her notebooks are still radioactive today. You can visit them, but only with gloves. Her life wasn't glamorous. It was relentless. She once said, "I am among those who think that science has great beauty." She never mentioned the price she paid for it. Alan Turing, the codebreaker who saved the world and wasn't forgiven for it during World War II. Turing broke the Enigma code, the German cipher that seemed unbreakable. His work shortened the war and saved millions of lives. Afterward, he was prosecuted for being gay. The government chemically castrated him. He died at 41, officially ruled suicide. Decades later, Britain apologized. A statue was built. His face went on bank. Too late, of course. Apologies always are. But his machines evolved into modern computers, and his theories became the foundation of artificial intelligence. Every algorithm is a quiet monument to him. Lisa Meitner, the woman who split the atom and lost the credit in 1938, physicist Lisa Meitner and chemist Otto Hahn discovered nuclear fission. When the Nobel Prize came, Hahn got it. She didn't. She'd fled Nazi Germany months earlier, carrying the calculations in her head. She refused to work on the atomic bomb later, saying, "Science makes men reach selflessly for truth. It should not be turned against mankind." History caught up, eventually. There's an element named after her now. A small, late apology, but at least it glows. Rosalind Franklin, the ghost in the double helix. Franklin SX-ray. Images of DNA showed its spiral structure years before anyone else saw it. Watson and Crick used her work, without permission, and built the model that won them a Nobel Prize. She died of cancer at 57, never knowing how crucial her data had been. Her colleagues later admitted she'd done the hardest part. If the double helix is a symbol of life, then her story is a reminder that discovery often costs the discoverer. If the last stretch was about people chasing knowledge, tonight is about the things that chased people back. Every age has had its stories of cursed jewels, haunted statues, and unlucky artifacts. Sometimes the curse was just bacteria. Sometimes it was greed, guilt, or coincidence. But the pattern never changes. Something beautiful appears, people want it, and someone ends up regretting it. So, settle in. The museum lights are dim, the air smells of dust and superstition, and we're about to meet a few objects that refuse to sit quietly. The Pope Diamond, misfortune in blue lets. Start with the most famous piece of bad luck you can buy insurance for. The Hope Diamond, a deep blue stone, 45 carats, found in India's Golconda mines. A French merchant named Jean-Baptiste Tavernier brought it to Europe in the 1600s. He sold it to King Louis XIV, who wore it until he died of gangrene. His heirs, guillotined later, owners went bankrupt, divorced, or died suddenly. By the time the diamond reached America, newspapers were listing its casualties like box scores. Today, it sits behind glass in the Smithsonian, glowing calmly, completely still. The security alarms are silent, but every tourist knows, you don't joke about that stone. Maybe it's not cursed. Maybe it just likes attention. The Pharaoh's Revenge. Tutankhamun's Tumin, 1922. Howard Carter broke into the tomb of Tutankhamun, and the press immediately broke into hysteria. When Lord Carnarvon, the expedition's sponsor, died soon after from an infected mosquito bite, headlines screamed curse of the Pharaoh strikes. In reality, most of the excavation team lived long lives. But truth never sells as well as mystery. What's real is stranger. The tomb was perfectly sealed for over 3,000 years. The air inside had not moved since the Bronze Age. Bacteria, mold, and ancient dust filled every breath Carter took. Maybe the curse was just microbiology. Still, there's something poetic about it. Kings trying to rest, and centuries later, we still can't let them see the Iceman, the alpine ghost discovered in 1991. C was a naturally mummified man found frozen in the Alps. 5,300 years old, with tattoos, tools, and an arrow still lodged in his shoulder, within a decade. Several people connected to his discovery had died unexpectedly. A guide, a scientist, a journalist. The press, predictably, called it the curse of CYS. Statistically, it's nonsense. Emotionally, it makes sense. You can't dig someone out of the ice after 5 millennia without feeling like you've interrupted something. Now he rests behind glass in a climate-controlled room in Baltimore, perfectly preserved, staring forever at the ceiling as people whisper about him. The Delhi purple sapphire, a jewel that doesn't care for owner's it, isn't actually a sapphire. It's an amethyst, and it isn't from Delhi. But that didn't stop it from ruining lives. stolen from a temple in India during the 1857 uprising. It found its way to Britain, where every owner wrote about depression, bankruptcy, or tragedy soon after acquiring it. One owner, Edward Heronalon, locked it in 7 boxes and surrounded it with charms, warning, "Whoever opens this will do so at his peril." It now sits in the Natural History Museum in London, unboxed but politely not touched. Sometimes it's enough to keep the myth alive by leaving the glass between you and the story. The Bassano vase, a wedding gift with terrible timing, sometime in 15th century Italy. A young bride received a beautiful silver vase on her wedding night. She was found dead the next morning, the vase still beside her. Over the next few centuries, every new owner supposedly met a sudden end. By the 20th century, the vase was hidden away with a note, "Beware. This vase brings death." It eventually landed in a museum basement, where it remains boxed and unnamed, because no curator wants to test whether Italian curses respect catalogue numbers. The Crying Boy painting, Fireproof Misfortune, the 1980s. Britain developed an urban legend about a mass-produced painting called The Crying Boy, a portrait of a teary-eyed child sold in thousands of homes after several house fires. Newspapers noticed something eerie. The painting kept surviving. Walls blackened, furniture burned, but the crying boy stared out unscathed. The tabloids blamed a curse. Firefighters blamed varnish. Either way, people started throwing the paintings away. It's almost funny. A piece of sentimental art meant to comfort suddenly treated like a haunted object. Maybe the universe just has a dry sense of humor about bad taste. The Terracotta Soldiers, curse. Chin's silent army, again when the Terracotta Army was first uncovered in 1974. The farmers who found it were celebrated for about a week. Then their fields were seized, their homes demolished, and their compensation minimal. Most died poor while their discovery became a billion-dollar tourist site. No supernatural curse needed. Just bureaucracy, which, in fairness, might be worse. The soldiers themselves still stand guard, expressionless, silent, identical. A clay army watching their creators. Descendants learn the same lessons about power and consequence. The Dybbuk box, eBay's favorite haunting in the early 2000s. A wine cabinet appeared on eBay with a chilling backstory. Its seller claimed it contained a Dybbuk, a restless spirit from Jewish folklore. Buyers reported nightmares, strange smells, lights flickering. Hollywood turned it into a movie. Skeptics called it marketing genius. Today, the box sits in a private collection, occasionally toured for ghost-hungry audiences. It's probably just an antique, or maybe that's exactly what the Dybbuk wants us to think. The black Orloff diamond, the Eye of Brahma legend, says it was pried from the statue of a Hindu deity in India and carried away by a European merchant. He died violently. So did the next owner. And the next. By the 20th century, the diamond was recut and reset to break the curse. It now rests quietly in a vault, shining darkly under artificial light. Sometimes beauty itself feels like temptation made solid. A reminder that wanting something too much can look a lot like worship. The Bell Witch's Cave, a story that refused to die in early 1800s Tennessee. The Bell family claimed their farm was haunted by a spirit that talked, laughed, and tormented them for years. When patriarch John Bell died, locals said the witch had poisoned him. Visitors still report whispers and moving shadows in the nearby cave. Scientists call it airflow. Believers call it history clearing its throat. Either way, the Bell Witch never signed off. She just paused mid-sentence, waiting for the next curious listener. The Antikythera shipwrecks shadow you. Remember the Antikythera mechanism from earlier? The ancient Greek machine that predicted the movements of the heavens. The divers who discovered it in 1900 suffered accidents, decompression, sickness, even death. The wreck became known as unlucky. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe the sea doesn't like being disturbed. Every time a new expedition dives down, someone mentions the curse with a nervous laugh, and the sea, as always, keeps its opinion to itself. The cursed archaeologists rule if you dig long enough, something goes wrong. It's superstition wrapped in statistics. From collapsed tunnels to lost funding, archaeology has its own running joke. Every great find comes with bad luck attached. Maybe it's guilt, the quiet feeling that we're always taking from the dead. Maybe it's just entropy doing its job. Either way, the stories persist because they comfort us. They make accidents feel like meaning, and meaning feels safer than randomness. The philosophy of a cursively cursed object follows the same rhythm: found, admired, possessed, feared, hidden. Their morality plays written in mineral and dust. Each one whispers a warning that possession is a kind of gravity, and beauty always costs something. People call them cursed because it's easier than admitting we create our own disasters. We want the object to be guilty so that we can stay innocent. Civilizations build palaces to impress, but they build libraries to remember. And time, being an indifferent editor, keeps deleting both. Sometimes with fire, sometimes with flood, sometimes with neglect, so dim the light a little more. You're standing in a hallway lined with shelves that no longer exist. The air smells of smoke and rain. This is the long silence after the last page. The Library of Alexandria. Knowledge overboard we. Might as well start with the most famous disappearance in history. The Library of Alexandria. That legendary collection of everything humanity knew. Probably wasn't one building, or even one fire. It was a whole district of scrolls, lectures, and ideas. Ships docking at the harbor were said to have their manuscripts copied by librarians before they were allowed to unload cargo. It was obsessive, brilliant, and doomed. People argue endlessly about who destroyed it. Julius Caesar's army, Christian mobs, Muslim conquerors, or simply time. But honestly, it doesn't matter. The fire gets all the credit. The slow forgetting did the real damage. Every time I picture it, I don't see flames. I see smoke rising over the Mediterranean and the sound of papyrus curling quietly in heat. A long exhale from history itself. The Ashurbanipal Library, the first archive centuries before Alexandria. There was Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian king who collected clay tablets like they were trading cards. He built his library in Nineveh around 650 BC, carving entire shelves of cuneiform tablets, literature, laws, medicine. Omens: when Nineveh fell, the library burned, and the fire baked the tablets into stone. The flames that were meant to destroy ended up preserving them. That's the universe for you, equal parts cruel and practical, today. Those tablets sit in museums, still legible, still telling stories of gods, floods, and human stubbornness. Ashurbanipal called himself the keeper of the wisdom of the gods. He died in war, but his shelves survived the apocalypse he started. The House of Wisdom, Baghdad's Golden Minden, the 9th century. Baghdad was the intellectual capital of the world. The House of Wisdom was its beating heart, a translation hub where Persian, Greek, Indian, and Arab scholars worked side by side. They copied Aristotle, invented algebra, mapped the stars, and argued philosophy late into the night. In 1258, the Mongols arrived. When they sacked the city, the library's books were thrown into the Tigris River until the water ran black with ink. Witnesses said the current slowed from the weight of pages. Imagine that, a river so full of words it could barely move. Then the water cleared, and the silence began. Nalanda, the university that vanished in what's now India, there once stood Nalanda, an ancient Buddhist university that welcomed thousands of students from across Asia. Its libraries held texts on science, art, religion, medicine. Some 9 million manuscripts. In the 12th century, invaders set fire to them. The blaze reportedly burned for months. Monks fled with whatever scrolls they could carry, and the rest turned to ash. All that remains today are red brick ruins under a hot sky, quiet as a prayer cut short. Nalanda's destruction wasn't just about conquest. It was about erasing questions. And questions, it seems, are flammable. The Maya codices. Words in smoke, the Maya wrote thousands of books on bark paper, folded accordion style, and painted with symbols that tracked planets and gods. When Spanish missionaries arrived in the 1500s, they declared those books demonic. They burned them all. Thousands of years of astronomy and history, gone in an afternoon. Only for codices survived, a handful of pages rescued from the fire, carried secretly across oceans. Now they sit in glass cases, protected from the same sun that once illuminated them. Every time I look at their neat, painted glyphs, I think of all the voices that never made it out. Imagine an entire civilization trying to explain itself, only to be told its language didn't count. The Library of Constantinople, the empire's quiet ending for 1,000 years. Constantinople was the vault of Greek and Roman knowledge. Its libraries copied, preserved, and protected texts the West had forgotten. Then came 1204, the Fourth Crusade. The city was sacked, not by enemies, but by its supposed allies. Books were torn apart for their jeweled bindings. Manuscripts were used to wrap loot for shipping. When the Ottomans finally took the city, in 1453, little remained. The last librarian is said to have hidden manuscripts under the floor and vanished. We never found them. Maybe they're still there, dreaming quietly under layers of dust and empire. The fire of the Benedictine Abbey of Monte Cassino in Italy. During World War II, Allied bombers flattened Monte Cassino, one of the oldest monasteries in Europe. Its library held ancient manuscripts copied by monks since the 6th century. Miraculously, some of it was saved. German officers had moved the books out weeks before the bombing. They weren't saving history on purpose. They just liked nice things. Sometimes preservation happens by accident. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all. The Sarajevo Library, modern ashes in 1992. During the Bosnian War, the National Library of Sarajevo went up in flames. Over 2 million books, manuscripts, and rare documents burned as people watched from across the river. Shelling turned paper into snow. Pages floated down like silent birds. A librarian who survived said, "We tried to save the books, but they were screaming." You can still see scorch marks on the building today. A quiet monument to the fact that even in the modern world, knowledge burns as easily as ever. The Codex Leicester, the one that got away, not every book was lost. Some just disappeared and reappeared centuries later. like Leonardo da Vinci's Codex, Leicester, a notebook full of mirror writing, sketches of water flow, and the science of light. It vanished for 400 years, then resurfaced in the 18th century. Bill Gates bought it in 1994 for $30 million. He scans and loans it to museums now. Maybe the most expensive act of curiosity in human history. One book saved from oblivion. Countless others never got that chance. The memory of paper, if you think about it. Every book is a fragile rebellion against time. Ink fades. Pages crumble. And yet, somehow, enough survive that we can still read, still remember, still quote. The real miracle isn't that libraries burn. It's that we keep rebuilding them. Every generation looks at the ashes and says, "Let's try again." Whispers from the shelves listen. Even the libraries that vanished still hum. Every time you open a book, you're continuing their spell. You're repeating what someone once whispered by candlelight, thinking it might matter someday. It did. You're proof. The night feels a little older now. Perfect time to talk about gods who stopped answering. Faith, like everything else, has an expiration date. People build altars, sing hymns, light incense, and then one day, someone forgets to relight the fire. Centuries later, all that remains is the smell of stone dust and the faint echo of belief. So tonight, we'll walk softly through the ruins of religions that once defined the world. No miracles, no thunder, just silence, and maybe the faintest sense that someone is still listening. The gods of Sumer, voices in Clather, first gods we know by name, were born in Sumer, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates. They were practical deities, more bureaucrats than mystics. Each city had its own Enlil for wind, Inanna for love and war, Nanna for the moon. People brought offerings, recited hymns, and feared floods more than damnation. The temples doubled as grain stores, tax offices, and social clubs. Religion was administration with incense. Then the rivers changed course. The cities fell silent. The gods who ruled heaven on tablets of clay were forgotten under layers of it. Today, we read their prayers in museums, little wedge marks pressed into baked mud. And when you think about it, that's all scripture ever really is. Human anxiety preserved in the most durable format available. The Egyptian pantheon, gods that outlived their people. The Egyptians built religion like architecture to last. Their gods were everywhere, painted on tombs, carved in temples, baked into bread. Ra sailed the sky, Osiris ruled the dead, and Isis stitched her husband back together so often she practically invented resurrection. For 3,000 years, the system worked. Then the Greeks came, then the Romans, then Christianity. The temples closed, the statues were defaced, the gods, still smiling, went mute. When archaeologists uncovered the tombs, they found prayers, still carved in perfect hieroglyphs, addressed to deities no one had spoken to in 2 millennia. It's oddly comforting. The idea that devotion can outlast devotion's object. Maybe that's immortality. The Greek pantheon, gods with personality disorders. The Greek gods never really died. They just ran out of worshippers. They were the first. Truly dramatic deities, jealous, petty, flirtatious, unpredictable. Mount Olympus was basically an immortal soap opera. When Christianity took over, the temples crumbled, but the myths stuck. We still name planets after them, tell stories about their feuds, and borrow their words for therapy. Narcissus, Oedipus, Panic. All Greek, so maybe they didn't vanish at all. They just rebranded as psychology. The Norse gods, the long winter Odin, Thor, Loki. They've had a modern comeback thanks to movies, but their first ending was quieter. When Christianity reached Scandinavia, the old temples fell, and the priests of Odin traded mead for sermons. The sagas survived only because monks copied them, half horrified, half fascinated. The Norse believed the world would end in fire, Ragnarok, when gods and giants destroy each other. Maybe that was their way of admitting that even the divine isn't immune to time. You can still visit the old Viking sites, mounds, runestones, wooden posts half swallowed by moss. They feel less like ruins and more like pauses, as if the gods stepped out for a while and might come back when the snow melts. The Aztec gods, blood and sunlight. The Aztecs built a world powered by sacrifice. They believed the sun survived only through nourishment, human hearts, preferably. Thousands climbed temple stairs to meet the knife and keep the universe running one more day. It's easy to judge from a distance, but to them, it wasn't cruelty, it was maintenance. A cosmic barter system. Then came the Spanish. The temples were torn down, the altars smashed, and crosses raised in their place. The sun, ironically, kept rising anyway. Maybe the gods accepted retirement gracefully. The Celts and Druids, faith. In the fog, the Celts left no holy books, only fragments of myth and whispers written down by the people who conquered them. They worshipped rivers, trees, and stones, things that couldn't be burned. When Rome arrived, druidic groves were cut down. When Christianity spread, saints conveniently took over sacred wells and hills. Conversion is easier when you just change the name on the sign. But walk through Ireland or Wales at dusk, and the landscape still feels inhabited. The stories are still there, just quieter. Faith doesn't vanish. It decays into folklore. The Zoroastrians, the fire that still burns older than Judaism. Christianity and Islam. Zoroastrianism once ruled Persia. Its followers worshipped Ahura Mazda, the god of light and truth, and believed in a cosmic struggle between good and evil. Fire was sacred, not as a god, but as a symbol of clarity. When empires shifted, the temples fell, and the faithful fled east into India, becoming the Parsis. Their fires still burn in quiet sanctuaries today. If you stand in one long enough, you can feel the past flicker, stubborn, small, still warm. Maybe some gods don't die. They just scale down, the forgotten god of the Israelites before monotheism. Early Israel had neighbors with their own pantheons, and their own gods occasionally blended in. Archaeologists have found inscriptions to Yahweh and his Asherah, suggesting the early Hebrews may have once imagined a divine pair. Later, Asherah disappeared, erased by reformers who preferred a single voice in heaven. The result was the faith that shaped half the planet. It's strange to think it began as just one more family of deities trying to make sense of storms and droughts. History doesn't play favorites. It just keeps what survives the editing. The goddesses of the Indus before Hinduism had names like Shiva and Vishnu. The people of the Indus Valley built small terracotta figurines, wide-hipped goddesses holding grain. No one knows what they were called or what prayers were said to them, but they appear in thousands of sites, suggesting a culture that worshipped fertility, water, and the quiet miracle of survival. When the cities dried up, the goddesses turned to dust too. Still, their faces keep showing up, serene, unfinished, unbothered. They've been forgotten for 4,000 years and still don't look concerned. The lost gods of Africa cross, ancient Africa. Every region had its pantheon, spirits of rain, ancestors, rivers, and iron. Colonialism erased many of them, but their echoes live on in drum rhythms, folk tales, and the quiet rituals still practiced in secret. Some beliefs survived by hiding inside new ones. Yoruba gods reappeared in Caribbean saints, Egyptian magic folded into Christian prayers. Faith is adaptable like that. It knows how to disguise itself to stay alive. The ghosts of faith all, these religions ended differently, some violently, some gently, some just through boredom. But what remains is the same, symbols carved in stone, names nobody pronounces quite right, and the faint feeling that maybe belief itself never dies, it just changes form. Even atheists light candles sometimes. Even scientists whisper please before the experiment starts. Old habits die slow. The stillness of empty temples, picture this. A ruined temple at sunset, columns cracked, birds nesting where incense once burned. You step inside, and the air feels heavier, like memory condensed. No chants, no offerings, just a long echo where devotion used to live. You can almost hear the last priest locking the door and walking away, thinking maybe they'll come back tomorrow. They didn't, but we did, centuries later, trying to remember what they believed. Tonight we're going underwater. Not for treasure, not for monsters, just for memory. The sea keeps secrets better than any library. It folds the past into silence, smooths the edges, and leaves only shapes behind. Cities, statues, harbors, whole coastlines, swallowed, softened. Still breathing under salt and light, so take a deep breath. The surface is miles above us now. Heracleion, Egypt's sunken gateway for centuries. Heracleion was a rumor, a city mentioned by Greek historians and then lost to geography. It sat near the mouth of the Nile, where pharaohs greeted foreign ships and priests performed rituals to the sea god. Then one day, it was gone, earthquakes, floods, shifting silt. The city slipped under the Mediterranean sometime around the 2nd century BC. It stayed hidden for 2,000 years until divers found statues, the size of houses resting in the mud when they raised them. Their faces were still serene, their smiles barely changed by centuries of pressure. Now they sit in tanks of desalinated water, waiting to dry out slowly enough not to crumble. It's strange how a city can drown and still look like it's just holding its breath. Pavlopetri, streets. Older than memory off, the coast of Greece lies Pavlopetri. The city so old it predates both Homer and the pyramids. Stone roads, courtyards, tombs, still there, visible through clear blue water. It wasn't destroyed by war or fire, just swallowed when the land sank a few meters. The sea didn't erase it. It just covered it like a blanket. Scientists mapped the city using sonar and drones, tracing walls where people once cooked, argued, fell asleep. Now fish glide where children used to play. It's oddly peaceful, as if the ocean decided to keep the place safe. Port Royal, the city that sank in Jamaica. 1692. Port Royal was the richest. Rowdiest port in the Caribbean, pirates, rum, gold, and the kind of nightlife that makes moralists write pamphlets. Then, on June 7th, an earthquake hit. The ground liquefied, and half the city slid into the sea in minutes. Survivors called it divine punishment. Historians call it bad engineering today. Divers swim through taverns and warehouses still filled with 17th century bottles and coins. The city lies tilted and quiet, frozen mid-party. Even underwater, you can almost hear the music stop. Yonaguni, Japan's submerged mystery in 1986. A diver off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, found what looked like a pyramid underwater, terraces, steps, pillars. Some say it's a natural formation shaped by waves and time. Others insist it's the remains of an ancient city, older than written history. The debate still drifts like silt, science on one side, imagination on the other. Both sides might be right. After all, erosion and ambition have been working together since the first human picked up a chisel. Whatever it was, it's beautiful, clean lines, blue light, and silence thick enough to feel like gravity. By Rome's underwater resort if you think luxury is modern. You've never met Bai, the Roman Empire's favorite vacation spot. It had marble villas, bathhouses, fountains, and the occasional political scandal. Then volcanic activity lowered the land into the sea. Now divers swim through mosaics and marble statues, half buried in sand. You can still see dining rooms, courtyards, even steps leading nowhere. It's like Pompeii decided to cool off. Nero had a villa there. Caligula too. The water makes them seem peaceful now, their excess dissolved. Their empire reduced to coral and calm. Dwarka. The city of Krishnov, India's western coast, lies the supposed site of Dwarka, the legendary city of the god Krishna. Texts describe it as shining with gold and submerged after his death. For centuries, it was mythed at then, in the early 2000s. Sonar scans revealed geometric ruins beneath the waves, walls, anchors, pottery. Maybe not divine, but definitely human. Archaeologists debate whether it's the same city or just another settlement lost to the sea. Either way, faith found proof, and proof found mystery. The line between them blurred, as it always does underwater, at Lydiam, the Neolithic Atlantis of Israel's coast. At Lydiam sleeps in 8 meters of water. It's over 9,000 years old. A Stone Age village complete with wells, houses, and even a burial site where a mother and child still lie side by side. It was swallowed by a tsunami when the last ice age ended and the seas rose. The waves that killed it also preserved it. Now divers drift through a circle of ancient stones, possibly the world's oldest ritual site. No inscriptions, no idols, just alignment with the sun. Pure faith in geometry and the sky. The drowned forests of Doggerland between Britain and mainland Europe once lay Doggerland, a wide, green plain where hunters lived, cooked, and watched the tide creep higher every year. By 6000 BC, it was gone, drowned by rising seas. Fishermen still pull up bones, tools, and even mammoth tusks in their nets. The land that connected Europe became the North Sea, and the people became ghosts in sediment. You can almost imagine them standing on the shore, watching the water advance, realizing too late that the map was changing forever. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, Lost Light, the Ferris of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders, guided ships for 16 centuries. Then earthquakes dropped it into the harbor. For years, fishermen dragged up marble and bronze without realizing what they'd found. In the 1990s, divers finally mapped the site. Colossal blocks, statues, and fragments of the beacon still lie in clear blue water. It's fitting, really. A light that once guided sailors now sleeps beneath the waves it warned them about. Even lighthouses need rest. Cleopatra's palace, the queen below the waves, near those same ruins lies another legend. Cleopatra's palace, submerged by a series of earthquakes around 365 AD columns. Statues and sphinxes lie scattered across the seabed. Divers found coins with her face still visible, eyes calm. Almost bored, it's strange to think the last queen of Egypt is now buried twice, once by time, once by tide. The sea, apparently, keeps what it loves. Xicheng, the lion city of China built during the Ming dynasty. Xicheng was flooded in the 1950s to create a hydroelectric dam. Entire neighborhoods disappeared under 40 meters of water. When divers rediscovered it decades later, they found an underwater ghost town, perfectly preserved gates, carvings, and rooftops. All intact beneath still water. It's not ancient, but it feels timeless. A reminder that progress buries beauty. Sometimes gently. The myth of Atlantis. Again and again Atlantis never happened, but it keeps happening anyway. Every time the sea takes a city, we remember the story. Every time a diver finds a wall or a statue where none should be, we whisper its name. Maybe Atlantis isn't a place but a pattern, the inevitability of loss dressed up as myth. Civilization builds too close to the water, the tide rises, and the story repeats. The ocean doesn't need to explain itself. It just waits. You've made it to the edge of the map. Everything's quiet here. No empires, no libraries, no gods or kings or broken machines. Just the slow rhythm of time breathing in and out. This is where history stops, pretending to be a story and becomes what it really is. A circle, the weight of all that was every ruin. Every name we've whispered tonight sits on top of something else. Ashes under bricks, bones under roads, mistakes under progress. Civilizations don't vanish. They stack. If you dug straight down through the earth, you wouldn't find answers, just layers of people who thought they were the last. Every one of them had plans, and every one of them was interrupted, and yet here we are, stacking more layers, leaving more traces. The pattern doesn't end. It just gets quieter. The shape of time, most people imagine time as a line, a neat arrow with a start and an end. But maybe it's more like sediment. Soft things falling on soft things, pressed together until they turn to stone. Every moment we live becomes part of the next one's foundation. That's why history never really dies. It just changes texture. When you walk through a museum, you're not looking at the past. You're looking at the residue of curiosity, people trying, failing, and trying again. The loneliness of memory, the funny thing about memory is that it never asks for permission. You don't get to choose what the world remembers or forgets. Sometimes the smallest thing, a cup, a coin, a scribble, survives longer than any monument. Somewhere in a drawer, there's a fragment of pottery with fingerprints still pressed into it. Someone's whole life condensed into the texture of clay. We'll never know their name, but the mark is there, and that's enough. The future's future ruins it. Easy to laugh at ancient myths about floods and fire. But if you squint, the pattern is familiar. Rising seas, restless weather, bright towers built too close to the shore. Someday, someone will stand over what used to be our cities and call them lost. They'll dive through our buildings the way we dive through temples. They'll find screens, plastic, maybe a fossilized coffee cup, and wonder what kind of gods we served. And maybe they'll tell stories about us, the same way we told stories about Atlantis and Babylon. They'll think we were beautiful and strange. They'll be right. The sound of everything, endings never sound like they should. No explosions, no curtain drop, just a slow fading of details. Languages shift. Songs lose their melodies. Ink fades in sunlight. And one day, the world moves on without realizing it's moved at all. But the end of one thing is always the background noise of another beginning. The universe is good at recycling. The persistence of small things, the biggest empires fell. The grandest cathedrals crumbled. But a single line from an old poem that survived. A recipe on a fragment of papyrus. A lullaby someone hums without knowing why. A tool still sharp after 10,000 years. These are the true survivors. The things that weren't trying to be remembered. The quiet kind of immortality we spend our lives trying to make marks. Buildings, books, data, songs. But immortality doesn't live in the marks themselves. It lives in the act of noticing. Every time someone looks at a ruin, reads a fragment, or says a name aloud, that life flickers again for a second. History isn't about what happened. It's about who's still listening. Everything, all at once, picture. All of it now. Pompeii's frozen streets. Cleopatra's palace beneath the waves. Galileo squinting at Jupiter. A monk in a library copying a line he doesn't understand. A pharaoh dreaming of forever. A king watching his crown slip. A scientist writing in the dark. All of them still here, layered in the same invisible moment. Every voice, every echo, every heartbeat that ever existed. All murmuring at once beneath the thin hum of the present. If that's not eternity, I don't know what is. The candle and the dark that passed is a candle that keeps burning even when the wax runs out. Every generation lights it again, just to see a few feet ahead. It's not much. But it's enough the dark around it isn't evil. It's infinite. And the candle's flame isn't knowledge. It's attention. The simple act of caring long enough to keep the light going. That's what we've been doing here. Not learning, just remembering to look. The last word, if there's one truth buried in all this dust, it's that nothing is truly lost. Everything becomes something else. Stone to sand, breath to air, sound to silence. Even forgetting is just another kind of preservation. The past doesn't disappear. It dissolves into myths, into ruins, into you. So take a breath. You've carried 10 parts of history in your head tonight. That's more than enough for one lifetime. The world will keep turning, slower than it feels. And somewhere, deep beneath it, all the stories we told are still waiting, patient, familiar, unending.